Hello everyone, this is Ray Space with further developments of the Asuka Spaceplane in Kerbal Space Program 1.12 with Realism Overhaul. I have changed the mass of the spaceplane so that it matches what I calculated in my spreadsheet presented in the previous video. So now it's heavier, and that has necessitated some changes. Also, on the videos where I sent it to the moon, it had lost its main landing gear because it had sort of crashed into the rocket sled. So I decided that we are going to just dump the rocket sled off the edge of the ramp. So it's got parachutes to parachute down, hopefully. The parachutes are appropriately sized based on real chutes. But that saves us some trouble because then the rocket sled will just get dumped off and there's less chance of the spaceplane actually knocking into it. And you'll see how that works out in a sec. So yeah, that's a bit nicer. We're not lighting the rocket engines, the aerospikes, on the ramp. We're just going to use the jet engines, so that saves us some fuel. And numerous other changes. KOS is going to take it all the way to orbit, hopefully. And what I'm really thinking about right now is the mix between the methane, hydrogen, and oxygen, whether to tweak that or not to get better results. And KOS will deal with things consistently, hopefully, and so that'll allow me to judge that better than when I was controlling it. I have changed the engines as well. The aerospike engines are now 10% larger physically, and that means that they have 20% or actually 21% more mass, but also 21% more thrust. It is I've kept it to a thrust weight ratio of 80 intrinsically. We needed more thrust because, well, you'll see in a bit, this thing has to keep a pretty high pitch in order to try to get to space once the rocket engines are lit and the ramjets are off. So I decided that we could do with a little bit more thrust. That does allow the arrangement that I discussed in the previous video to happen, wherein on the aerospikes we have 14 nozzles each, and 8 of those nozzles will be pure hydrogen oxygen nozzles and 6 will be pure methane oxygen nozzles. And that means that the little chambers do not have to have each a triple propellant mix. That simplifies things, but the hydrolox mode is then less thrust, but because they're sized up a little bit, we've dealt with that. So anyway, I've updated the KOS script. I have not gotten to orbit with this in this configuration yet. I had to make changes, but I think we are close enough now that I can present it. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, off we go. Oh, so I decided to tilt it. Oh no, I got stuck there. Sometimes it has glitches like that. That's just a glitch. Random sort of thing. Kerbal being Kerbal. The general process is first I aim camera, then I release the plane and the sled, and I unlock the water, and then start the KOS script. Okay, the jet engines are on. We get to a somewhat higher speed than before because I actually downscaled the rocket sled as well as the ramp. So we're now... oh, that disappears for some reason. I'll have to deal with that. But they're now 80% the size because they were originally sized for the Orion carrier plane, and this is much smaller. That saves me the trouble of having ballast. Previously, when I had used this, I had added ballast tanks to the sled to weigh it down a bit. And we check, nothing's broken yet. When it says 15 Gs there, that's because of the bumps on the ramp, not because it was actually accelerating at that. So at this moment, it is just the jets burning methane and of course intaking the oxygen. Alright, we are pitching down to break the sound barrier. It does that at 10,500 meters. Alright, and then once it gets past 400 meters per second, it increases its climb. But basically it dropped from 10,500 meters to 9,000 in the course of getting through the transonic speeds. It is a bit twitchy at this part though. It stabilizes after we get to Mach 2.1. So that's nice. Not too sure why it's twitchy after Mach 1.4 up to Mach 2.1. Okay, we are now in ramjet mode and accelerating quickly. Guzzling that methane. Okay, Mach 4.2. And at 27 kilometers and 1300 meters per second, when both of those are reached, we will switch on the rockets, the aerospike engines. Oh, actually a little bit earlier than 26.5 kilometers. And the drastic pitch up at about Mach 4.4. We are in tri-propellant mode, so the aerospikes are burning methane, hydrogen, and oxygen. They get 418 seconds ISP at this point with that mix, but of course more thrust than they would with just the hydrolox. And we will switch to just hydrolox once the methane has basically run out. There is residuals. There's a certain amount that we can't use. At 32 kilometers, the jet engines shut down. We try to get as much of them from them as possible, because we sure need a thrust-weight ratio. There we go, they are off. And so right now we barely have a thrust-weight ratio of 1. And the script is basically told not to let the time to apoapsis get too high, so it'll pitch down whenever the time to apoapsis goes above 40 seconds. But it'll wait a bit. So, I mean, it's pitching down right now from 45 degrees. But each time it pitches down a degree, it waits a little bit to check so it doesn't go down too fast. Past 100 kilometers in altitude, still on the methane, hydrogen, and oxygen mix. Alright, getting close to when it's going to switch to just hydrolox mode as we run out of the methane. But will it switch smoothly is a question. And then how much delta V do we have? And do we have the right mix of hydrogen and oxygen? If we have too much of one or the other, then we're not going to get as much delta V as we ought to. The reason why we would have a bad mix is because, well, we've been through a few modes just using methane with the ramjets. Okay, here we go. It's a somewhat awkward switch, but here we are. And then tri-propellant mode, and then the dual propellants, hydrogen and oxygen. So right now it's pretty tight, but it seems like we have enough. But we might still be able to do better if we can balance those out a little bit better, or maybe we have the right mix. I can't really tell right now. It's not a simple ratio like, 2-to-1 or something like that. It will be a tight orbit. Hopefully it doesn't make it too tight as it's pitching down here. I may have had it go into mode 6 a little bit too early here. It'll still probably be okay. So we do have enough thrust, even though these now have less thrust in this mode. 1,400 kilonewtons compared to the full thrust with the methane 2,400. They are now 3-ton engines. We're carrying a smaller than full supply of food, water, and oxygen, but that's about 2 weeks worth, so it is enough for a trip to the moon, basically. But I added capacity for food, water, and oxygen for cases like when we're in the Saturn system and stuff like that. In which case, there's about 2.5 months. Oh, well, it's overdoing it a bit. Whoops. I guess I'll have to check out that end condition. It should have ended a little bit earlier than that. We certainly made orbit. Oh, Orlando's really popping up there. We made orbit with about 100 meters per second left, but then it overburned on the apoapsis, so that's not great. As far as the balance between hydrogen and oxygen, it's nearly right. We have probably about 2 tons extra of the oxygen, so we could rebalance that a little bit. But yeah, well, I did make it heavier after doing the calculation, and now it's having a little bit more trouble, but at least with all the tweaks I did, it is getting to orbit. And it'll need to be refueled here, of course, before it goes anywhere else. But I'll check out the script to make sure that, first of all, our periapsis gets a little bit higher and the apoapsis a little bit lower. And maybe a few more optimizations can be done as far as the trajectory is concerned, because it was pitching down a lot near the end, and we didn't really need to do that. So, but that is the progress on this. It is slightly more legitimate than what it was before, because I've done the mass calculations a little bit more properly. So, with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.